Good afternoon and welcome to our weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield news anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
You know, this week we get to talk about a little bit more than basketball, which is a lot of the March Madness going on, but it's a flurry of reports this week and we'll get to those. But let's start first and talk a little bit about what happened and recap this week on the markets.
Yeah, when we look at hogs to begin today, cash hogs were down about $1 for the week. When you look at the pork cutout value, we were down $2.30 relative to a week ago. And across the board, we were down loins, butts, picnics, ribs, hams, bellies, all lower as we look through the week. On the cattle side, we saw feeder steers and heifers steady to 6 higher, feeder calves steady to 4 higher. Really good demand on the feeder cattle front this week. Fed cattle prices steady to firm for the week. We didn't get a lot of trade here till very late on Friday. So it's been a good week on the cattle side. When you look at the futures side of the picture, I'll just point out fed cattle futures about $3 higher for the week. It tends to remind us that we're starting to see fed cattle futures close towards cash prices. So we're maybe closing that gap a little bit. And the other, I guess, good news for livestock producers at least is we lost on the corn price side. So we got some cheaper feed as well as we trim 15 to 20 cents off of corn prices for the week.
Scott, as we take a look at those futures numbers, what does that mean for producers and what are they taking from that and the indication from that future side?
Well, so I think, you know, we've seen a lot of discussion about whether futures prices are dragging down cash prices, if you will, and as those futures for fed cattle stayed well below cash for a period of time, and I guess, you know, the longer we go here, the more we're seeing that demand strength start to translate where we see futures prices move up towards cash. So I will continue to say it's a stronger situation in cattle markets as we march through this week. I think we're seeing a lot of outside interest in some of those cattle futures as well, as people are perhaps seeing the opportunity for futures prices to move closer to cash as we move ahead as well.
A flurry of reports this week. Let's start first with the biggie today, cattle on feed, kind of a snoozer.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, it's nice maybe for a change not to see too big of moves when you look at reports relative to pre-report estimates. When you look at on feed as of March 1st, setting right at a year ago levels. So not a lot of increase. When we looked at marketed in February, we were at 103.5, so up a little bit in terms of marketed, but placed on feed, setting at 98.8 of a year ago, is maybe in some ways some good news. I think when you look at feeder cattle coming from Mexico as well here, we did see some increase that probably helped us on cattle on feed or cattle placed on feed in February.
When we talk about that placement number specifically, is that a number that we need to see in that direction, at least for a little bit?
Yeah, so I think we all know that we have more cattle out there today than we've had in the past, and seeing a placement number that sits there below a year ago, I think gives us a little bit of hope that maybe there's not a big slug of cattle sitting out there. Well, we'll continue to have to wait and see, but it's a good way to start 2017 still that, you know, we're not talking about placing 103.5% like we saw at the top end of the pre-report estimates. That kind of number would have concerned me about what we'd be doing for the next couple of months in terms of placement. So all in all, I'll say I can't be too bearish relative to that report, and the placement number certainly gives us some hope that maybe numbers aren't quite as big as we might have anticipated.
Let's talk about some other reports this week. Let's start first with the cold storage report. Really all good news on that front.
Yeah, so I think we continue to see this balance that demand, frankly, is pulling along at a rate that outpaces what's been the supply growth that has been the broken record we've been on for several months in a row. When you look at what we saw at the end of February, about 2.2 billion pounds of beef, pork, chicken, and turkey sitting in freezers. That's 1.6% less than a year ago. Now, that's higher than where we were in January, but seasonally we would expect a little bit of growth. So being down 1.6% certainly tells me that we're keeping up on the demand side with the growth in supplies that we have coming to the marketplace. Perhaps the one place where we see a little bit of concern comes on the chicken side of the front, and breast meat inventories still remain fairly large, and probably will be difficult to keep breast meat prices higher here for the next few months.
Livestock slaughter numbers also came out this week. As we take a look at those figures, what is the one thing maybe that you're taking from that report that's going to be key for our producers?
Yeah, we need to continue to stay focused on what kind of supply growth that we see occurring. This is the other side of the equation, right, that we've been talking about. So average daily beef output, and I talk about it this way given that February has a different number of days this year relative to last year, up 7.7%. When you think about the pork side of the equation, up 4.3%. We're growing pork and beef supplies and chicken supplies as well. But the numbers out of this report remind us that we need strong demand growth, and we're going to continue to be growing pork and beef supplies, and livestock slaughter just gives us an indication of that growth that we've been seeing taking place so far in 2017.
Funny you should bring up the demand element. There's been some pretty interesting news coming out of Brazil this week. Scott, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about what happened and the announcement that came out of there and what that means for our livestock producers here in the U.S.
Yeah, so that Brazil story continues to unfold in terms of a number of countries that have now curtailed trade with Brazil as a result of some of the concerns over what kind of meat has been exported out of Brazil to different countries, and whether there are issues with the quality of that product. I will say, you always want these things to happen to your neighbor, and it's really nice when it's your neighbor in another country that's having trade restrictions. It seems to me at this point, so we've kind of had a wait and see attitude as we move through the week in terms of what this really means. But as countries continue to be added to the list of who's not taking product from Brazil, and when you see processors in Brazil who are now saying, we're not going to slaughter here for a few days, it just all reminds us that it doesn't take very long for product to get backed up domestically when you depended a lot on exports. I'll take cattle for just a minute. We would have expected Brazil to export about 2 million metric tons of beef in 2017, being perhaps the largest beef exporter in the world in 2017. And even if come Monday morning we say, oh, sorry, that's all not a problem, I think at this point it will take a little bit for those markets to open back up to Brazilian product, and we're going to be the beneficiaries, or we're one of a number of other exporters that might be the beneficiaries of what's going on. And this is not just a cattle issue. When you think about it, we compete with Brazil in a number of meat markets, and I think all of this bodes well, and frankly might be the thing that makes for higher livestock prices in the United States in 2017. So we don't want to discount it. We need to continue to pay attention to see what happens next week if this continues to evolve to become a larger story, which has kind of been the direction as we move through the week. It could spell even more price appreciation occurring here in the United States.
Scott, I think one of the interesting aspects of this is the fact that it may not mean that China is going to come to the United States to buy their beef directly, but if they source from another country, let's say Australia, that already has a shortage because of their drought conditions, does that open up maybe markets that Australia was entering to the United States, and indirectly it comes back and benefits us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the trade flows, we're going to move them around. All right. So I don't expect, we'll see a lot of U.S. product going into China. We'll wait and see how 2017 unfolds. But somebody's going to have to fill some of that market as well. Now, this all gets very interesting because normally in a situation, you'd expect Australia to pick up perhaps a lot of these markets. But when you look at what's going on in Australia, where a drought has really reduced their herd, resulted in record prices within Australia, very similar to what we saw in 2014, early 2015. I'm not certain that there's a lot of Australian product to be put on the market as well. So it's really tightens up that global beef trade a lot. And there's just not many other countries that can provide some of what I might term the lower quality markets that Brazil was filling as well. So I think it pulls up all boats here a little bit. And we don't have to be the direct beneficiary of some of those markets as much as having the opportunity to fill some other markets that those that might now export to a place like China will fill. So it's nothing but good news in terms of how that beef will be moved around country by country.
Scott, as we talk about that, we think about the high-path avian influenza outbreak here in the U.S. on the disease side of things. Why is it important for us to continue to monitor what's going on and where maybe that's migrating as the birds are moving north through the Mississippi Flyway?
Yeah, so you only have to look at Brazil, where you get this complete shutoff of trade as a result of issues, to remind us how vigilant we need to be to keep export markets open. When you talk about industries that have 10, 15, 20 or more percent of production that's being exported, all of a sudden if that export level goes to zero and those pounds of product have to be consumed domestically, it can wreak havoc on an industry. So there's the idea that we're able to see in this case of having a few cases of high path AI so far, that we get some regional trade restrictions, but we don't lose the entire market, gives us a continued opportunity to trade in those markets. High path AI is one that we're going to have to continue to pay attention to if we start to see a lot more cases unfold as we move through the next few weeks. And countries were to come back to us and say, yeah, we're going to put a broader restriction on, that's where it could, again, be a negative for us. And so we have to take a wait and see attitude. But export markets, as much as we like to provide product to the rest of the world, we must keep those markets open once we start trading if we want to minimize any kind of price impact we can have from the negative side of that. So watching high path AI is going to be very critical for us the next few weeks.
Scott, as we look ahead to next week, there's that little report coming out next Friday, the prospective plantings report. As we start to see those pre-report estimates and start to think about what USDA is going to unfold on us next week, how does that impact and how much of an impact could that have on livestock producers as they're planning for the rest of this year?
Yeah, so I think it will give us some indication of just total acres, number one. There's been a lot of discussion about corn versus soybean acres and how many soybean acres are we going to get and how many corn acres are we going to get. I was hoping you were going to give me those numbers today as we talked, but it seems to me one of the things we're going to see is I anticipate we're going to plant a lot of acres of both of those commodities in total. Hopefully it sets in motion then that with reasonable weather, we only talk about growing supplies of corn and soybean meal as we look ahead. It may give our livestock folks a little better feeling that supplies are going to remain large for feed and will be the good thing that helps the bottom line of cattle producers, hog producers, chicken producers as we look ahead. If we see a large cut in total acres, then that might be the signal that crop farmers are going to make some changes because of the lower prices they face. So getting that kind of acreage mix discussion out next week will be good. I'm sure the minute that we see prospective plantings out, we're going to find why folks have chosen different acreages relative to those prospective numbers right away. So the debate will only intensify as we get to actual planting time.
And ultimately, Mother Nature has the final say in all of that.
Absolutely. So we'll wait and see whether we get an early spring with a lot of corn in, or it becomes really wet and we start talking about a lot more soybean acres.
Hogs and pigs also next Friday. Any big surprises expected in those numbers?
Yeah, so I'll be watching very carefully how many sows we have in the next hogs and pigs report that we get on Thursday. It seems to me that will kind of set in motion supplies here for the rest of the year and give us some indication of how many more sows maybe we've added to the herd as we've seen capacity on the processing side come on board, or will come on board as we move through 2017. I think that's going to be the critical number that we see out of hogs and pigs next Thursday.
Scott, have a great weekend. We will talk to you next Friday.
Very good, Megan.
All right, to have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday, you can go to brownfieldagnews.com, click on the link to subscribe there. You can also submit questions or comments for Scott or myself. And if you'd like to receive our Market Minute update, subscribe to Brownfield TV on YouTube. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.